The wet market on Gyeongnan Road thrummed with a chaotic symphony of shouting vendors, sizzling woks, and the percussive thud of cleavers. Through this vibrant maze, a man in a bespoke black suit moved with the fluid grace of a startled deer. Shun Xiaoe, heir to the Shaw Corporation, vaulted over a pyramid of oranges, his tie flying over his shoulder like a silk banner of rebellion. Behind him, two barrel-chested bodyguards in ill-fitting suits lumbered through the crowd, their polished leather shoes slipping on discarded vegetable leaves. "Stop, young master, please," one of them bellowed, knocking over a basket of bok choy. "Chairman Feng is waiting." Sean ignored them, his jaw tight with irritation. Another blind date. Another carefully selected corporate princess whose only personality trait was her father's net worth. He'd rather spend the afternoon sorting spoiled fish than endure another minute of it. He ducked under a canopy dripping with roasted ducks, the scent of five spice and grease filling the air, and ran straight into a wall of solid, unyielding force. The collision sent him stumbling back. A spray of ice and water showered his pristine suit, and something small and black skittered from his hand, landing near a puddle of fishy water. His gaze followed it, then rose to the person he had struck. She was not a wall, she was a woman. Ho Ching Ching Shaong to the market regulars didn't even flinch. She stood planted behind her stall, one hand steadying a massive grouper on the wooden block, the other holding a filleting knife that glinted with lethal purpose. The blade moved in a single, swift arc, separating flesh from bone with a precision that was more surgical than culinary. She wore a stained waterproof apron over a simple t-shirt and jeans, her hair pulled back in a severe, practical ponytail. There was a smudge of something on her cheek, but her eyes were startlingly clear and sharp. Without a word, she nudged a fallen tilapia back into her bucket with the toe of her rubber boot, her movements economical and efficient. Then, her sharp gaze landed on the object near Sean's feet. She bent down, her back straight, and picked up the black card. With a calm deliberation, I felt almost insulting, she wiped its slick surface clean on a corner of her apron before extending it to him. "You dropped this," Shaong said, her voice as steady and cool as the ice in her fish pins. "Looks important. You should be more careful when you're running from your keepers." Sean stared, momentarily speechless. He was accustomed to women who would either feign ignorance of the card's value or see it as an immediate opportunity. He had never encountered someone who handled a limitless Centurion card with the same disinterest as a stray fish scale. He took it from her, their fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. Hers were cold and calloused. The Shao family mansion was a museum of silent judgment. Sunlight, filtered through towering French windows, illuminated dust motes dancing in the sterile air, each one seeming to settle on Ho Ching Ching's simple cotton dress. She stood beside Sean, feeling less like his chosen partner and more like an exhibit he'd bafflingly acquired from a flea market. Across the vast reception room, a woman who could only be Sean's mother, Madame Shao, surveyed her with the cold precision of a gemologist inspecting a flawed stone. Her posture was ramrod straight, her silk cheongsam a liquid sheath of silver and jade. "Sean," she began, her voice a low, melodious weapon, "you've always been particular, so you must explain this." "A woman from the docks." Before Sean could reply, another voice, sharp and saccharine, cut through the tension. "Auntie, don't be so harsh." Perhaps Sean developed a taste for rustic charm. Evelyn Tang, her socialite whose family fortune was as old as her contempt for the lower classes, glided into the room. She circled Ching Ching like a shark, her eyes cataloguing every frayed thread. "Darling," Evelyn cooed, her smile a slash of crimson, "the smell of the sea still clings to you. I suppose some things just can't be washed away." She tilted her head. "What was it you did again?" "Gutting fish." Ching Ching's hands, clasped behind her back, tightened into fists. The humiliation was a physical heat rising in her cheeks. But she had gutted more than fish in her life. She had gutted pride, torn down expectations, and fought for every scrap of dignity. She met Evelyn's gaze, her own eyes clear and steady. "Yes," Ching Ching said, her voice ringing with surprising clarity in the cavernous room. "I gut fish. My hands are calloused from work, not soft from idleness. Better the honest smell of labor than the stench of a mind that's been rotting in a gilded cage." She took a step forward, closing the distance Evelyn had tried to create. "And for the record, it's not a rustic charm. It's the woman Sean Shao married this morning." A collective gasp rippled through the assembled relatives. Madame Shao's face paled. "Married, Sean," who had been watching the exchange with a flicker of amusement in his guarded eyes, finally moved. He reached into his jacket and produced two small, red booklets, dropping them onto the polished mahogany table with a soft, definitive thud. "The marriage licenses. Official as of 9:15 a.m., he stated, his tone flat, daring anyone to challenge the fact. He found himself impressed, more than he'd admit, by Ching Ching's fire. She wasn't wilting, she was sharpening herself against their condescension. The shock gave way to a strained, oppressive dinner. Ching Ching sat beside Sean at a table long enough to host a state dinner, feeling the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes. The interrogation began, led by a stern-faced uncle. "Miss Ho." "Mrs. Shao," Ching Ching corrected sweetly. The uncle's eye twitched. "Mrs. Shao. How exactly did this whirlwind romance begin?" "It seems highly improbable." The subtext was clear. "You're a gold digger. How did you trap him?" Ching Ching knew a direct defense was useless. They wouldn't believe the truth, a pragmatic contract, and they were determined to believe the worst. So, she decided to give them a story they couldn't possibly resist. She picked up her water glass, her hand trembling just so, and took a delicate sip. Her eyes misted over. "It was a moment of weakness," she began, her voice a fragile whisper. "For both of us." She looked at Sean, her expression a perfect blend of adoration and sorrow. "I was delivering seafood to one of his hotels. He saw me." Sean remained impassive, but inwardly, a storm of disbelief and grudging respect was brewing. This was audacious. "He followed me to the market," she continued, warming to her theme. "He said he'd never seen hands that worked so hard." Her gaze drifted to her own hands, as if lost in a precious memory. "He bought me strawberries from a nearby stall." His hands, they trembled when they brushed against mine as he gave them to me. A few of the younger cousins exchanged intrigued glances. Sean, the infamous germaphobe who carried antiseptic wipes everywhere, touching a fishmonger's hand. It was the most romantic, unbelievable lie she could have possibly spun. "We met in secret," Ching Ching choked out, a single, perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. "He knew you wouldn't approve. We loved each other so desperately. But we were trapped." She paused, her voice breaking. "And then the inevitable happened." Madame Shao leaned forward, her icy composure finally cracking. "What happened?" Ching Ching's face crumpled in a mask of tragic beauty. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with fabricated sobs. "I found out I was pregnant," she wailed. The dining room erupted in muted chaos. Sean's jaw went slack. He stared at her, utterly floored. She was a goddamn mastermind. "But I couldn't bring shame upon the Shao family." Ching Ching lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes wide with manufactured sincerity as she looked directly at Sean's mother. "I couldn't let a child born under such circumstances tarnish your reputation." "The doctor, he said it was twins." Her voice dropped to a devastating whisper. "I did it for you. For the family's honor. I took care of it." The lie, monstrous and brilliant, landed with the force of a physical blow. Madame Shah gasped, a hand flying to her heart, her face a canvas of horror and most importantly, guilt. The woman who had looked at Ching Ching with such disdain now saw a tragic heroine who had sacrificed her own children for the family's name. Sean, his mother cried, turning on her son, her voice thick with accusation. You let this happen. You let this poor girl go through that alone. The uncle who had started the interrogation was now shaking his head in disapproval, not at Ching Ching, but at his nephew. The tide had turned completely. The entire family was now looking at Sean as if he were a monster, and at Ching Ching as the martyr who had saved them all. Through it all, Sean said nothing. He simply watched the woman beside him, the fishmonger from the docks, as she expertly wielded their own prejudices against them. She hadn't just survived the onslaught, she had conquered the room. And he realized, with a startling jolt, that his simple, contractual marriage had just become infinitely more complicated and fascinating. The sharp crack of crystal shattering on marble silenced the room. Xiao Han's furious accusations still hung in the air. That every eye was now fixed on the figure slumped beside the dining table. Mrs. Xiao, her face a mask of ashen shock, clutched at her chest, her breath coming in ragged. Desperate gasps. Panic erupted. Mr. Xiao froze, his face draining of color. Xiao Han, his earlier bravado melting into fear, fumbled for his phone, shouting, "Someone call an ambulance." Now, the household staff scurried in circles, their professional composure fracturing into useless chaos. Only two people remained still. Sean, whose eyes were locked on his mother, his body rigid with a terrifying helplessness. And Xiaong, everyone, back away, give her air, she commanded. Her voice, devoid of panic, sliced through the hysteria with the clean authority of a surgeon's scalpel. Heads turned. Xiaohan scoffed. What would you know? Get away from her. Fishmonger. Xiaoang ignored him. In one fluid motion, she was on her knees beside Mrs. Xiao, her fingers pressing against the older woman's carotid artery, her eyes counting silently. Her pulse is steady. Help me lay her flat. Gently. Her instruction was not a request. Sean, jolted from his stupor, moved instantly to help. As he and a petrified butler lowered his mother to the floor, Xiaong tilted Mrs. Xiao's head back, clearing her airway with an expert's economy of motion. Her calm was an unnerving, magnetic force in the whirlwind of fear. She loosened the tight collar of Mrs. Xiao's silk blouse and began checking her pupils. Sean watched, mesmerized. The way her hands moved steady, precise, and utterly confident was alien. This was not the sharp-witted girl from the fish market, nor the quiet, observant woman who navigated his world with wary steps. This was someone else entirely. A memory, fragmented and hazy, flickered at the edge of his consciousness. A sterile white room, a scent of antiseptic, and a calm, reassuring voice cutting through his own pain after a car accident years ago. He remembered a pair of hands, just as steady, treating him. He could never recall the doctor's face, only her competence. The echo of it was here, now, on the floor of his family's dining room. She's stabilizing, Xiaong announced, her gaze never leaving Mrs. Xiao's face. The ambulance is on its way. 5 minutes. A butler stammered. Good. Don't move her again until they arrive. She rose, her expression returning to one of quiet composure, as if she hadn't just held her life in her hands. She met the stunned gazes of the Xiao family, her own clear and direct. For the first time, they weren't looking at a commoner or an inconvenience. They were looking at a savior. Mr. Xiao, his voice thick with emotion, could only manage to words. The cloying scent of champagne and hypocrisy was making it hard for Xiaong to breathe. Her skin prickled, a fiery map of the strawberry mousse Jiang Ying had so sweetly insisted she try. Trapped under the glare of a dozen judgmental eyes, she felt her composure start to fray, just as Jiang Ying was about to deliver another saccharine-laced insult. A wet, guttural sound tore through the delicate strains of the string quartet. All heads turned. Xiao Han, Sean's younger cousin and the night's celebrated fiancé, was clutching his throat. His face, moments ago flush with joy, was rapidly turning a terrifying shade of blue. He clawed at his collar, his eyes wide with a silent, desperate plea before he crashed to the polished marble floor. Panic erupted. Women shrieked. Men shouted for a doctor, but the crowd simply surged backward, a panic wave leaving Xiao Han isolated in a sea of helplessness. The allergic reaction still blazing across her own skin, Xiao felt the strange condescend. The chaos faded into a low hum as another instinct, sharp, precise, and utterly foreign, took over. A ghost in her hands guided her forward. She pushed through the wall of onlookers, her movements economical and sure. Kneeling beside Xiao Han, she confirmed the obstruction, anaphylaxis. His airway was closing. Her eyes scanned the nearest table fruit knife. Towai, fork, useless. Then she saw it. A sleek, silver fountain pen in a guest's discarded jacket pocket. Hold him still, she commanded, her voice cutting through the hysteria with an authority that surprised even herself. She clicked the pen, removing the ink cartridge and leaving a hollow metal tube. Without a second of hesitation, she located the crocophorid membrane in his neck, a piece of anatomical knowledge that surfaced from the depths of her fractured memory. A collective gasp filled the air as she pressed the sharp tip of the pen casing against his skin. What is she doing? Jiang Ying's voice was a venomous shriek. Stop her. She's a fishmonger, not a doctor. She's killing him. The accusation acted like a spark on dry tinder. The crowd, already agitated, turned on Xiaong. A man grabbed her shoulder, trying to pull her away. Get off him, you crazy woman. But Xiaong didn't even flinch. With a single, decisive thrust, she pierced the membrane. A faint hiss of air escaped. She inserted the hollow barrel, creating a makeshift airway. Xiao Han's violent convulsions eased, and the faintest wisp of color returned to his lips. Touch my wife again, and you will answer to me. The voice was like a glacier moving through the room, cold, powerful, and unstoppable. The man holding Xiaong's shoulder froze, his hand dropping as if burned. The crowd parted. There stood Xiao, not the unassuming director everyone at the subsidiary thought he was, but a man radiating an aura of absolute command. His eyes were arctic chips of ice, fixed on the scene. President Xia, someone whispered, the name rippling through the room in a wave of shock and awe. Sean strode to Xiaong's side, his presence of fortress around her. He placed a hand on her back, a gesture of silent, unwavering support. At that moment, paramedics burst through the doors. A lead medic took one look at the scene, the pen, Xiao Han's stable breathing, and his eyes widened in professional respect. Who did the cricothyrotomy? He asked, his tone urgent. Jiang Ying pointed a trembling, accusatory finger. She did. She attacked him. The medic ignored her, checking Xiao Han's vitals. Whoever did this saved his life. Another 30 seconds, and he would have had irreversible brain damage. It was perfectly executed. The pronouncement hung in the air, a stunning vindication that turned Jiang Ying's face pale with fury and humiliation. The whispers in the crowd shifted from condemnation to amazement. The next day, the incident at the banquet was nothing compared to the seismic shock that hit Shanghai International. An email, sent from the highest echelon of the Xiao Group, landed in every employee's inbox. It included a photo of Sean and Xiaong from the banquet, his arm wrapped protectively around her. The message was brutally clear. Huo Qingqing was the wife of the group president, and any employee found perpetuating malicious gossip or demonstrating the slightest disrespect would face immediate termination. The executives who had sneered at her, the assistants who had whispered behind her back, were now frozen in terror, their faces a mask of disbelief and regret. Her status was no longer a question. It was an edict. That evening, in the quiet of their penthouse, Xiang stared at her own reflection. The woman who looked back was different. She had saved a life. The muscle memory, the calm under pressure, the knowledge that had flowed so effortlessly it was all real. Ho Ching. The name no longer felt like a phantom, at a resurfacing truth. A part of her she was slowly, terrifyingly, beginning to recognize. Sean found her standing by the window, the city lights painting patterns on the glass. He didn't speak at first, simply watching her. "You walked right into her trap," he finally said, his voice low and tight with an anger that felt different from his usual cold demeanor. It was laced with something else, concern. "You knew she put strawberries in that cake. Why did you eat it?" Xiaoang turned, a small, defiant smile playing on her lips. "To expose a lie. Sometimes you have to let them think they're winning." She was defecting, unwilling to admit that the raw, primal fear she'd felt for his cousin had momentarily eclipsed her own safety. His jaw clenched. It was reckless, Xiaoang. Dangerously so. He took a step closer, his gaze intense, searching. He was worried, genuinely worried for her, and it went far beyond the terms of their contract. She saw it in his eyes, but she wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. He let the silence hang, then gave a curt nod, turning away. But as he left the room, his resolve hardened. He would find out what happened to her, who had erased the brilliant Dr. Ho Ching and left the resilient Xiaoang in her place. His investigation would continue, more urgent than ever. He had to know the full story behind the woman with a faint, star-shaped birthmark on her thigh, a mark he remembered from a distant, fork-shrouded memory of his own. Meanwhile, in the Shao family mansion, Sean's mother replayed the scene from the banquet in her mind. The crude fishmonger she had despised had transformed before her very eyes into a figure of incredible strength and grace under fire. She had stared down death and an angry mob with nothing but a pen and sheer nerve. "That girl," she murmured to her husband, a newfound respect dawning in her voice. "She isn't a gold digger. She has more steel in her than this entire family. She's an asset." For the first time, she saw Xiaoang not as a temporary solution, but as the true mistress of the Xiao family.